Well, hey, you guys. Welcome back to the salon. Merry Christmas and happy holidays to all you freaks and weirdos out there. Obviously, we're going to do some Christmas stuff this week. Hopefully, I can get a couple more videos put out sometime before Christmas actually arrives. And, us horror people. We kind of celebrate Christmas a little bit differently than regular people, I guess. While most of your normies are, gathering around the TV set in their jammies with their little steaming cup of cocoa and their, maybe 5 millionth viewing of It's a Wonderful Life or Miracle on 34th Street or something like that. Weirdos like me, and probably like you if you're watching this video, we're kind of, carved from an entirely different chunk of bloody flesh, let's call it that. So to celebrate this most magical and terrifying of holidays, let's unwrap a double dose of horrific Christmas carnage. That's right, we're doing a double feature of some Christmas horror movies. So first up, we got a movie from 2015, the very straightforwardly titled anthology film, A Christmas Horror Story. Now, while I kind of feel like the bulk of most anthology films usually kind of present their stories one after the other with maybe something of kind of like an overarching frame story that kind of loosely links everything together, this one, and I kind of feel like maybe some more recent ones have done this as well, but this one kind of takes the more original route of weaving all of the stories together into one narrative and shifting back and forth between them. So it's not kind of like a story with like little frames in between. It's basically just goes back and forth like that, as though they were all happening simultaneously, just in different parts of town and with somewhat interrelated characters. Now, I actually really like this conceit quite a bit. It made the movie seem more like a single cohesive whole rather than just kind of like a disjointed series of unrelated tales that were only, related because of their theming, like around the holidays or whatever. So the movie is set in a small town called Bailey Downs, in which a gruesome murder took place on Christmas of the previous year. Now, the framing device of A Christmas Horror Story sees the wonderful, amazing William Shatner, aka the Shat, as we call him. He plays a radio DJ named Dangerous Dan. And he kind of like sits in this very festively decorated studio, trying to impart some holiday cheer to his listeners while slowly getting drunker and more depressed, like as the movie goes on. Now, really, only one of the anthology stories ties directly in with the previous year's murders. But there is kind of like an underlying implication throughout the movie that this particular town is maybe suffering under some kind of curse that, could make terrible things happen like every Christmas, because it's implied that like every Christmas, like some real fucked up shit happens. So in the first story, you have a group of 3 high schoolers, and they sneak into their school, like after it's closed for the holidays or whatever. The school actually used to be a convent, like where some real shifty shit took place, like back in the day. And so they sneak in and into this sealed off basement of the building, which is where the grisly killings happened 1 year before. So these students are actually working on a documentary project for a class, and they want to get some footage of the actual room, like where the 2 victims, one of which we later learn is Dangerous Dan's grandson, or was his grandson, because he's dead, obviously. But yeah, they both got hacked to death, and the murderer left a line from a Christmas song, like written on the wall in blood, like after the murder. So, so these kids go down there to film this room, and things go about as well as you would expect, meaning not very well at all. Now, meanwhile, one of these high schoolers' friends, who was initially supposed to go with them, like on this excursion where they broke into the school, she instead gets dragged along with her very dysfunctional family to visit some estranged and very unpleasant relatives. It turns out that the dear old dad of the family is really, really running low on cash, but doesn't want to tell his wife or kids this. So he's essentially going there to beg his terrible parents for money. Now, the parents are of German extraction, and they're very wealthy. Now, they have a little statue of Krampus on a side table that the bratty grandson purposely breaks. I mean, what a shithead. So again, that goes about as well as you would expect. The third story deals with a guy named Scott Peters, who was one of the cops who investigated the previous year's murder. Now, him and his wife and their adorable little son are heading out into the woods to cut a Christmas tree. And Scott decides he's up for a little law breaking in order to get the best possible tree for the season. So he very impishly trespasses onto the land of a dude named Big Earl. Nobody named that. Nothing good ever came from anybody named that. So he goes onto this dude's land and he finds the absolutely perfect Christmas tree. But along the way, the son disappears for a time. Now, his parents are frantic, obviously, but they finally find him stashed into the hollow of another tree, not like the one that they're cutting down. But when they get the little kid back home, they discover that, how should I put this? He's not quite the same. And in fact, over the course of the story, it comes to light that the kid has been replaced by a changeling who just proceeds to wreak all kinds of holiday havoc. And in the goriest and most hilarious segment, which is set at the North Pole, you have a very, very rugged Santa and a very milfy Mrs. Claus. And they're forced to deal with a zombie virus outbreak among their immortal elf workforce. Now, the elves, they all have names like Jingles and Shiny and Sparkles, which really made me laugh for some reason. So all of the elves have turned from, just cookie-eating little cutie pies into murderous, foul-mouthed little terrors, who basically don't hesitate to call someone a reindeer fucking snow whore before munching on their intestines. So once Santa has kind of dealt a little bit with the elfin menace, he realizes that Christmas Eve is almost over and he still has to deliver presents to all the good children of the earth, obviously. But just as he's about to set out to do that, Krampus busts in and, the two Christmas heavyweights have to go at it like mano a mano in this big, huge final battle royale. Now, as totally batshit as this segment is, it actually, believe it or not, ends up tying in nicely and very surprisingly with the overarching William Shatner bit. So in that sense, it's almost like a secondary frame story in a way. Now, as I mentioned, I really do like the interwoven nature of the stories rather than them just happening like one after the other. It was actually really cool, like spotting all the connections between the characters and the situations, like as the story went on. Like I said, it wasn't like the whole story played out. It just kept like jumping back and forth, which I thought was like really interesting. William Shatner is priceless in this. He's absolutely perfect. And he just gets, over the course of the movie, he just gets more and more despondent. Which is pretty amazing to watch. And I have to say, too, this was pretty amazing. Like, despite the stories being directed by different writers and directors, all the stories, like, hung together, like, astonishingly well. Even though the tones of them were, like, a little bit different, but it was still, like, thematically, like, really, really, it all went together really well. Now, a couple of the stories, this happens with every anthology, but, a couple of them were slightly more compelling than the others. I mean, for example, I personally thought that the Changeling story was actually the creepiest and the most effective. Like, when that kid turned to there was a couple scenes in there where it was, like, really, really freaky, like, with the kid. And the zombie elves were easily the funniest and, like, the most entertaining and the goriest. But I have to say that this is a really, really solid and very, very fun entry into the holiday horror like canon. So if you haven't seen it and you really like anthology movies, then this is probably one of the best ones for Christmas. Now, for the second movie in our Christmas double feature, what's the first thing you think of when you think of Christmas movies? If you didn't say abortion, then evidently you and the director of this movie cannot be friends. Yes, that was another sentence I never thought that I'd say. So this is a 2016 film called Red Christmas, and it was done by an Australian writer-director named Craig Anderson. So this movie, as previously implied, wades very bravely, like right into some pretty controversial territory, and ends up with a very strange, potentially kind of offensive film that actually, in my opinion, was actually way better than it had any right to be. So there's kind of this weird prologue at the beginning, and it's showing protesters on both sides of the abortion issue, kind of waving signs and screaming at each other. And then an unseen woman inside a clinic who's undergoing an abortion, and it's interrupted by a bombing. So the aborted fetus is just, yes, I'm talking about a Christmas movie. The aborted fetus is very hastily chucked into like a biohazard bucket like that. But soon after that, a tiny bloody hand emerges from the bucket, and then the fetus is rescued by a priest who is actually also one of the clinic bombers. So we then cut to many years later. So the matriarch of this family, whose name is Diane, who's actually played by Dee Wallace, and she's great in this. I mean, I love her. She's great in everything. So Diane is very happy to have corralled all of her grown children to this, the homestead, this house she has. It's kind of like remote, like out in the middle of nowhere. She wants to have one last quote unquote perfect Christmas in the family home before she sells it. Like, her husband has died of cancer, like, not too long ago. And she's planning on using the money from the sale of the house to, like, take a trip to Europe and treat herself for once in her life. Because she spent, like, a lot of her life, taking care of her husband and kids and everything like that. And now she just wants to go do something for herself. So that's what she's going to do. This plan of hers, though, isn't sitting too well with some of the offspring. Now, she has a very pregnant daughter named Ginny. And Ginny thinks that her mother is being very selfish and kind of like besmirching her father's memory, I guess, by selling off the house that she grew up in. And she also is of the opinion that she's shirking her responsibilities as a mother because I neglected to mention that Diane also has another grown son named Jerry who has Down syndrome. And so her going to Europe is going to necessitate Jerry going into an assisted living home. Also causing tension on this holiday get-together is the uptight, super Christian daughter, Susie, and she kind of has this husband named Peter who's like a real nebbishy, like a priest guy. And the two of them are just total buzzkills. They just very sourly disapprove of the rest of the family because the rest of the family are very laid back and they swear and smoke pot and all this other kind of stuff. And obviously Susie and Peter are just like looking down their nose at everybody. So all of this family awkwardness is interrupted by the arrival of a creepy dude in a black cloak whose face and hands are covered with bandages and who kind of talks like, the Elephant Man from like the David Lynch movie, right? Now, although we as the audience have already seen this hooded whoever it is murdering a guy who picked on him, like, so we already know like what the score is, Diane, if not the rest of the family, is initially sympathetic to this stranger who shows up on their doorstep because he claims that he's simply looking for his mother and he seems like a little bit pitiful. So Diane lets him in, gives him some tea, and even wraps kind of like an impromptu gift for him after he admits that he doesn't even know what a Christmas present is. But as they're all sitting there uncomfortably, the man, whose name we learn is Cletus, which rhymes with fetus, so you know where this is going, he insists on reading a letter to his mother that he's brought along with him. In the letter, which starts out from a place of love, he eventually mentions the abortion clinic bombing that we saw at the beginning of the movie, at which point Diane flips the fuck out and kicks this cloaked weirdo right out the house. And after that, the carnage comes thick and fast as family members get axed, blended, and bear-trapped to death in what essentially after that point becomes like a Siege style flick. It will come as a surprise to no one that this hooded killer is actually Diane's aborted, or so she thought, son, who was actually raised by one of the clinic bombers as essentially like a vehicle for vengeance, right? Now he only really starts taking revenge on the family like after they reject him. He doesn't seem to just like come out and kill people for the hell of it. Like he kills people that fuck with him first, or when he tries to like reach out to them and they're just like, yeah, get the fuck out my face, then he starts killing him. There are also some tie-ins with her other son, Jerry, and his disability, which kind of causes a brief bit of tension between Jerry and his mom, Diane, like later on in the movie. So obviously from that description, this is a very bizarre premise overall, and because of the opening scenes, you'll pretty much know who the killer is and what his motive is, like right from the very start. But honestly, I don't think that detracts from the enjoyment of the movie as a whole, or at least it didn't for me. Though the story does grow out of a pretty controversial topic, obviously, it doesn't really take a hard stance on the issue one way or the other. So it's kind of just more of a straight slasher with a controversial kind of, backdrop, I guess, rather than any kind of political polemic. It doesn't really seem like it's trying to make a statement one way or the other. Now, the setup takes a while, but I actually didn't mind that because I really enjoyed all these very tense, petty squabbles between the family members, like before the shit really started to hit the fan, and they all had to kind of pull together for survival, like after Cletus like started fucking them up. The death scenes in this are also pretty great, very gory, especially the blender to the back of the head kill, which was also very elegantly shot, weirdly, but it was like a really good, like, gory kill, very, very fun. I also really enjoyed, there's a single, very brief glimpse of the killer's real face, and I think that was a wise decision, like, because it was very effective that you only saw it for a few seconds and then never saw it ever again. Like, mostly you would see the face and it had bandages on it, so it was like much more impactful, like, when you saw it just for this brief time. So this is not a movie for everyone, obviously, and definitely not for the easily offended. I will say that it's not nearly as fun or as maybe like crowd-pleasing a Christmas horror movie as the first one, as A Christmas Horror Story, being oddly devoid of humor. I kind of feel like it has some humor to it, but not really. It's not like, given the premise, you'd think it would be funnier. And I guess you could say it kind of had some elements of black humor, but the humor in it is very, very dry, you know what I mean? So it's not like just super fun like A Christmas Horror Story is. But, I mean, if you're looking for a sort of strange, very nasty, essentially like a Christmas-themed slasher with a pretty original premise and some pretty great acting performances, particularly from Dee Wallace, who, like I said, I always love her, then, maybe give Red Christmas a spin. Like I said, it's kind of hard to recommend if you're not... because it is a Christmas movie, but... whether you want to watch something about that topic is entirely up to you. I enjoyed it, not as much as A Christmas Horror Story, but it's still pretty good if you really like kind of like nasty, gory, kind of controversial like slasher movies that are set around Christmas time. So that will do it for this double feature of Christmas movies. Hope you guys enjoyed it. What are your favorite Christmas horror movies to watch around the holidays? What are some new ones that maybe I haven't seen? I'm going to try and like watch some newer ones over the holiday season or the upcoming week, and maybe I'll throw some reviews here or over on my other channel. But yeah, so remember to like and share if you enjoy this content, and please, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and I will see you guys again on the next video. Bye.
Push